Good.
We're ready to go now?
Yep.
Okay. So, Ani bonjour, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to the final speaker that we have as part of Indigenous History Month, where I'm just so thrilled that I managed to cajole Alan Corbiere to doing this. And just for your interest in this whole series and this final talk. So part of our efforts for Indigenous History Month, which was June, was just to have a series of talks and speakers and a number of events in Indigenous history through the Indigenous Environmental Justice Project website and social media, so that people could just learn more about actually not even just about Indigenous people, but actually really making an effort to learn from Indigenous people, from their point of view and from their understanding, which I think this talk today was really going to, is really going to hopefully cement a lot of that, because Ellen will be speaking about place, language, and story, and how Anishinaabe people view history, which might be different than how other people might think about how everyone else understands Anishinaabe history, but really from our own point of view. So I'm just thrilled that he's here to be able to do that. So that's just probably a simpler way of saying a title that we shot around initially: Sources of Anishinaabe History, Narratives, Archives, and Museum Collections, which sounds really complicated. Place and knowledge and story sounds like something that we'll really super enjoy today. So we're just what we'd like to do is we're happy to field questions. Alan will be happy to field questions, and if some of them are relevant throughout his talk, we'll try to see if they could get addressed there. But if not, we'll try to leave time at the end for people to be able to engage with Alan and ask some questions. But Alan will introduce himself further, but Alan is, Dr. Corbiere, is a recent hire at York University in the Department of History in Indigenous History. If all goes well, will be a Canada Research Chair in Indigenous History, so that's all really exciting. Has been super committed and passionate about Anishinaabe and the centrality of that in the research that he does, and worked in Chiging in language revitalization efforts, and served also as director for the Ojibwe Culture Foundation. Recently won an award, I guess, actually maybe it wasn't so recent, the Governor General of Canada's Meritorious Service Medal for the language work that he's done. So many of us are just really appreciative of the kind of effort and passion that Alan has shown for that. So he's the final speaker. So we got in for June 30th, the last day of Indigenous History Month. So again, just welcome and enjoy. Beautiful day to enjoy it, at least anywhere, like in the GTA. Maybe it's too hot outside to run around and do stuff. So maybe this is the perfect time to hear a talk on history. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alan and enjoy. I know I'm going to.
Okay, miigwech deb. Ninso jik benendo dem mampim chiging don jaba. Minwa Ojibwe bode ademi ndao. I am a Anishinaabe of Ojibwe and Potawatomi descent, and my name is Ojik in Ojibwe, and that means the fisher. And my Dodem, my clan, is what we call the rough grouse, but others say the partridge. Chiging is on Manitoulin Island, and this is in Ontario. I don't know where everyone is tuning in from. So I just wanted to say, Nanabojo Anishinaabe dok, Wichken dok, Minwage, Kenen Dinwen Magane dok. I greet you in the name of Nanabojo, all of my relations, fellow Anishinaabe, as well as friends. I was asked to talk about, well, Deb and I just talked back and forth a bit about what we actually would talk about in June as Aboriginal or Indigenous History Month. So we never really settled down on the actual title per se, and it was initially going to look at sources, being museums, oral history, language, and archives. But as I started thinking more and more about it, it was Deb kept stressing that it was kind of whatever I wanted to talk about and what I thought people might want to hear. But I actually like to put some of these ideas out there and hopefully get kind of some feedback as I'm writing. I'm supposed to be writing a book, and I should say I am writing a book, and I have been hired at York University January 2020. So I'll start teaching in September 2020, but I'll be doing so online. So I've got to revise the course syllabus, but I also have to write this book. So I've been kicking around ideas for a while, and I've been doing a lot of reading. Anyway, when I applied for this Canada Research Chair, one of the first statements I made was that Indigenous history is still principally drawn from the colonial record, that is the archives, what is written by Indian agents, priests, and fur traders and soldiers. Those are the principal means still how we actually engage in Indigenous history. The elders that I talked to throughout the years, and then also in different books that I've read of elders' accounts of history, usually stress that they are still, our history is still not being told properly, or even in the best medium that it was handed down, meaning the original Indigenous language. So in my case, it's Anishinaabe, or some say Ojibwe or Ottawa. And even if you wanted to get more technical, binjibaamigak. So there's different languages that we use to tell our story, but of course, a lot of the archival sources that have been that are accessed, it's usually the majority that we use now is English, and that's because we've all been, well, the majority of us have been educated in English. But there's also a tremendous amount written in French that, as a non-speaker of French, and I sometimes can read and write some parts of French, but not enough to actually analyze those archival documents. I think that we still have to access a lot of French documents, but even more precious to me are documents written in Ojibwe. And in the archival research that I have done, I have found a number of different letters written by chiefs in the mid-19th century. That was when there was a kind of a boom of Anishinaabe wakagundak gemishumsabanik, meanwhile gemabanik. Our chiefs and our ancestors, our grandfathers, used to write in Ojibwe. And people don't really seem to know that or recognize that, but now that's starting to come out a bit more at this time. And I've put together a number of these documents, as much as I can, that are written by our chiefs. Some of them are written to the Minister of Indian Affairs, sometimes just to the local superintendent or Indian agent. And then other times they are written to the Governor General, as well as even some even wrote to the Pope, but also to bishops. And then so I put these letters together, and some were come from around Manitoulin Island, but others from other areas. And as I collect these more, there's some that are written in different orthographies, especially what I would call the Methodist or Anglican orthography that was kind of perpetuated and set down by the Reverend Peter Jones, who was a Methodist missionary. And then those that followed him followed that orthography. And then the French orthography that the Jesuits used that were ended up being used up here. But that's still, you could literally just count how many of those letters so far that I have found. And there's no more than 100 that I've found so far. So finding our Anishinaabe perspective written by our chiefs at the time of those treaties or at the time of historical events that we want to actually learn about is very scant. There's a very scant record from our point of view, written by our chiefs. So what we have had to rely on as well is anthropologists, ethnographers, and others that have actually recorded our elders when they have told those stories in Ojibwe and those stories that have been handed down. So those stories that have been handed down, they appear in a variety of collections. And linguists that I liked reading their work, the work of various linguists, like John Nichols, who was situated at the University of Manitoba for a while and University of Minnesota. And then, of course, the work of Anton Troyer with his Oshkabewas Native Journal. And then a linguist, Rand Valentine, as well. So there's a lot of different recordings that are becoming more accessible in this modern age now, especially with archives, different archives and different repositories are putting up those collections and making them more accessible digitally. Whereas before, 10 years ago, you had to actually go to that archive to actually listen to these recordings that are either done on wax recordings or other obsolete devices. So now we've had a bit of a resurgence of a Anishinaabe bigadek, anything written in our language. And now, as we get more sources from our elders and from elders that are past, we're actually able to start looking at those stories and try to match them with what the Indian agents, the priests, and the fur traders had written about us. So then we get a different perspective of actually hopefully what we would say is our perspective, because of course, as you know, there isn't only one perspective in history. But what we're able to do now is look at these stories and put them together and match them, or try to match them with the written record, as well as now what others are also doing, of course, is archaeological records and museum collections as well. So it's an exciting time to me to be in history, because you can try and pull all these disparate sources together and try and create a more fuller record of history of what occurred in the past, in order to understand our current situation and then to further improve it for the future generations. So that's what the elders used to always, what the elders always say. You will keep in mind those that are yet to come. You will honor those ones that have passed on, meaning our ancestors. So we try, when we're living in this time that we have here on earth, we honor our ancestors, but we also keep in mind those ones that are yet to come. So as many of you know, our languages aren't being as spoken as much as they used to. And people are trying different things, immersion schools for kindergartens and elementary schools, and then others are trying immersion schools with adults. And there's a couple of fantastic programs actually now. Dibaadjimowinan, they're doing a really good job. And then the one out in Minnesota with Azawa Binesiwon, Luciana Bonaccio, as well as Brendan Fairbanks at the University of Minnesota. They're just doing a lot of good work that I see a lot of young people picking up the language. So it's a more heartening time now to actually undertake this kind of analysis and undertake this kind of research, and to try and put together our story and get that into the not only provincial curriculum or state curriculum, but also on reserve in our curriculum. And that's basically what I've been trying to do for the last number of years. But it's kind of been a bottleneck in a sense of typing out all these variant orthographies into the current double vowel orthography, and then double checking that with different elders or speakers, namely usually my dad, and then also one of my mentors, Corbiere, Dr. Marianne Corbiere from University of Sudbury. So I try to pull together a lot of this stuff, and then it's a bit tedious in some senses, but one of the things that one of the books that I really enjoyed and use, and I'll talk about this, is a book that was edited by Howard Webkamigad of Wecquampcombe, and it's called Ottawa Stories from the Springs. And it's a bilingual book, but it's stories from Harbor Springs, Michigan. And he listened to those old recordings that are held at the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So he just the sheer amount of work of listening to all those tapes, writing them out in the current orthography, and then double checking the translations is just a huge undertaking. And I always try to get people to purchase that book and to use that book as a way to look at our history. So one of the things early on when I was doing my undergrad, this was in the late 80s and early 90s, was when I read the Michon's book by Eddie Benton Benet. And one of the lines in that book that always kind of guided my research is that when he talks about Oshkib Madzajik, new people will appear. Bizage wak, dabizage wak, Eshkib Madzajik. A new people will appear and they will look for things left along the trail. And of course, looking for things left along the trail to me meant looking for items that are currently in museums, but also recordings that are in archives, writings that are in different archives, as well as songs and ceremonies that people still carry in their living memory. So, and then to pull these all together. So that's been one of my kind of guiding goals throughout throughout my education, is that finding things left along the trail. And then another elder from our area, the late Dan Pine, said, it's time to wake up the medicines. And of course, for Anishinaabe people, medicine isn't just over-the-counter pharmaceuticals. It isn't just salves and ointments and kwakadon san or pills. It's actually those songs, those stories, those teachings, sometimes called intangible. So that's what I've been trying to learn about and to share. Whenever I come across something, I try to share it. So one of the other coming up, trying to analyze history, our history from our point of view, I read an article quite a while ago that was written by Onabanese, otherwise known as Jim Dumont. And in this article, it was called Journey to Daylight Land Through Ojibwe Eyes. And the quote that I'm going to read here is the one that I've used as a kind of a pillar of the framework of when I try to do Anishinaabe history. So he says, quote, "It is necessary to look at the North American native legend and mythology with an appropriate kind of vision. The kind of vision we are talking about is indeed a total way of seeing, which encompasses the essential elements of ordinary reality and seeks out the all-important manifestations of non-ordinary reality. This way of seeing recognizes two different realities which, though separated by a seemingly tremendous gulf, are concurrent and simultaneous, as well as impinging upon one another constantly," end quote. So he wrote that in 1976, and the examples that he used when he was the the stories that he used was a story that we in Chiging talk about an ancestor of the Debaske family, and his name was Nibakum. And Nibakum fought during the War of 1812, and he had his young men scout out the American position and to gauge how many guns they had, as well as their numbers, as well as their formation. And in the story, it is said that those young men were able to change themselves into bats at night and to go and do their reconnaissance. So what Jim Dumont says is that is the part of Native history. He says, but a mainstream historian would have trouble actually incorporating that part into their story. They would see that as fantastic or out of the ordinary, and that they don't really necessarily believe in this metamorphosis. So a mainstream historian would tend to make that into a metaphor or a simile. And Jim Dumont says that a mainstream historian might say, they cloak themselves under cover of the night, making themselves as inconspicuous as bats in order to conduct their reconnaissance. And he says this would be a disservice to Anishinaabe history. So for Anishinaabe history, basically, it is what he calls non-ordinary reality that we actually believe forms a basic part of our history. And that's the part that really doesn't get serious consideration in the Indigenous history as it's taught today. The other book I read a while ago when I was in my undergrad, and this also still forms a part of my framework, is I read God is Red, A Native View of Religion by Vine Deloria Jr. Of course, it's a classic. But he covers history in there as well. And one of the things that he had said is, quote, in theory, it is entirely possible to construct the chronological history of a tribe. This task would be accomplished by knowing the sacred places within the tribe's geography and all of the stories that are related to these places. By identifying the before and after of the stories and then arranging them on a timescale, one could project a chronology, end quote. So what he's reacting to, or what he's commenting on there, is this notion again that I had mentioned earlier, that some of the elders that I used to listen to, that I had the privilege of listening to, who have since gone on, these elders used to say that the land is our history book, or some would even say the land is our Bible. So this is what Vine Deloria is talking about, is that Indigenous history is done and is encoded in place names on the earth. And that if we know those place names, we know those stories that go with them, know those songs, then we can actually, we'll know Indigenous history from our point of view. So what he was also critiquing was Western historians' propensity for chronology, and that Native people, Indigenous people, don't necessarily ascribe to that chronological timescale. Their timescale is more cyclical and circular. So these are two main precepts or challenges that Indigenous historians face today, and how they are going to try and incorporate that while they do what is called history now, mainstream history. So you got all these different subdisciplines of history right now going on, public history, queer history, all these different types of history that you can focus on. But one of the things is, of course, Indigenous history. And when we tackle a term like Indigenous history, we're kind of in a sense saying that Indigenous history, many of these Indigenous groups are all the same. So I try to avoid that, and I try to say that I'm trying to do an Anishinaabe history. But as you see, I'm quoting from Vine Deloria Jr., who is a Sioux. But there are precepts that kind of span the area and the different nations. So one of the things that has received a lot of attention is that the Anishinaabe people call their stories Adazokan or Ansokan in our dialect, and dibaadjimowinan. And Ansokan is what people usually have translated as myth or legend. And then, but now it is also translated as the characters in those myths or legends. And meanwhile, the dibaadjimowinan is actually a narration, a report, or a story. And the late great Anishinaabe teacher, Basil Johnson, in his beginner course outline for Ojibwe beginner course outline done in 1978, he breaks down this word, dibaadjimo, as being deba, meaning measure. So when we say dibaagan or dibaganatik, that's a ruler. So deba is a measure, and then ajimo is giving an account. So dibaadjimowinan is giving a measured account of what had occurred. So anyway, and the adzokan. So scholars now are writing about this Atsokan versus dibaadjimowinan. And what I kind of see happening that I don't really agree with is sometimes they create this, maybe unwittingly, this dichotomy that either a story is an Ansokan or it's a dibaadjimowinan. But actually, when you listen to these stories and you listen to the storytellers tell them, it's actually not so clear cut. There is no dichotomy per se. There is a spectrum, and some are definitely, okay, that's an Atsokan, and that's a dibaadjimowinan. But other times, the lines are really blurred in between. One of the stories on Manitoulin Island is about zhinikaadek, and that's a reserve on Manitoulin Island at the west end. And we had when I worked at the Ojibwe Culture Foundation, we had a recording by Mary Grace Pelche, who is from Wikwemkong, and she told the story of this. So at the very beginning of the recording, she's asked about it, and then about just stories of Manitoulin. And here she says, "Niing zhinikaadek nongo and zhinikaadek. Ansok kan go we." So she says, why Shishigwaning is called Shishigwaning today. This is a legend, Ansok kan go we. Then she says right after that, Gi jowe bedagabash go geego. It did happen. Gaego at Ansok kan auzano. It is not only a legend. Gonon damnako Ansok kadek we sa Shishigwaning. Did you ever hear the legend of Shishigwaning? So why that's so intriguing to me is that she says it's a legend, but then she says it's not really a legend. It really did happen. So to me, the storytellers often vouch for that. So when I was doing archival research, I came across what is called the Bell Papers. And Robert Bell worked for the Canadian Geological Survey, but he got interested in Indigenous stories, and he got people to write them down, or he went and visited them and wrote them down. And when he wrote them down, then he has this collection of these stories. But he paid this fella named Eskimo to tell these stories. And when he wrote them, he said, "Mail them, and I'll pay you when I receive them." So Eskimo then recorded his relative, George Eskimo. And in 1892, George Eskimo told that same story of the founding of Shishigwaning. And then similarly, he stated right off the top that this did happen, but more than 2 generations ago. So again, people will call that a legend. And basically, the long and short of that story is that a young woman is fasting, and then the people are actually at that time experiencing a famine, and they're going hungry. But then the fishers of that village end up catching a sturgeon. And the sturgeon has a different marking, and it looks different. Something's not quite right with it. But they're all hungry, so they eat it. And then as they eat it, they start to turn into snakes. So of course, people of Zhinikaadek don't like this story anymore. But anyway, that's the story that Mary Grace Peltier told, and that's the story that George Eskima wrote down. There's more to the whole story, of course. I'm just giving you the Coles Notes version of it. But this, again, this comes to the principle or the crux of the difference between the Indigenous history and mainstream history. Indigenous history, the elders and the people that told the story actually say that this happened. And one person actually said happened more than two generations ago. And so, whereas to believe that actual people turned metamorphosed and turned into snakes kind of challenges our belief system today. So that was from a collection that we had put together by the at the Ojibwe Culture Foundation, and those stories have been published in a book called Getse Pichijik dibaadjimowinan. And if you ever get a chance to check out want to check out some books, some stories written in Ojibwe and in English, translated into English, that's one of them at the Ojibwe Culture Foundation. So the other, again, that's non-ordinary reality, that what Jim Dumont has called non-ordinary reality. And then again, this is also looking at that particular story that also gets to what Vine Deloria Jr. was talking about, gathering the stories attached to place and trying then to put them all together to come up with either a chronology or a grand narrative of Anishinaabe history that spans this whole land. Mikanak, Minishing, or some say Mishike, Minising, this Turtle Island, not just Nido Minising, this Manitoulin Island. Anyway, so there's a lot of different sources out there now that are coming out, being published, but I think in time we're going to actually be able to incorporate a bit more and actually get back to telling our history in our language. And that's what these stories are setting the foundation to do. So the next story that I want to discuss is taken from the Howard Webkamigad's anthology, Ottawa Stories from the Springs. This story, he entitled it, "The Man Who Was Taken Away by the Great Eagle." And this great eagle takes this guy out this guy is out ice fishing, and he's got his eshkanak, and that's to chip the ice. Anyway, as he's out there, that giant eagle just comes and picks him up and takes him away. And as he's taking him away, he flies up to his eyrie, this giant bird, and he tries to, as he goes flying up, he flies and he lets go of that Anishinaabe and he tries to smash him against the cliff face, but he uses that eshkanak, that chisel, to stop himself from being smashed. So that eagle tries to kill him a number of different ways because he actually wants to feed him to his young. Anyway, he survives. So he finally, that binesiwon, they say, that giant bird, puts that Anishinaabe in his nest. So here's part of the story that as transcribed by Howard Webkamigad. Oh, it's so beautiful and peaceful up there. Mandasa Ajbik, up on this high on this great cliff. Ajbik debishko gona gegin wejunda enabin deming manda. The cliff was similar to the way cliffs look down here on earth, and that is how they were up there. Migo ejinagodnik odeshpiming, the big gunaidik, gaegi kenzin. The man did not know where he was, and while he was there, he would sleep when he felt safe. Mi dash gudingo nash yatje, mbasa gieko, anish dom kumwan gego wibwa todagot. He would fall asleep when he felt safe, as he was watching out for himself so that the great birds would not harm him in any way. So again, I want to just emphasize there that this giant bird takes this Anishinaabe from here, and he says he took him up way up high, and that place looked the same as it does down here. And remember Jim Dumont's article that the places are concurrent and simultaneous, and in a sense parallel. So the story continues. The Anishinaabe isn't killed by this giant bird, but he's actually in the nest with the baby birds, and he ends up starting to feed those baby birds because the mother bird brings in his prey, but he starts cutting it up and feeding those birds, and those birds are able to eat. Gi nisabazat mabaya benesse, ga nisabazat je gunash piming, gumapi gien gego nabandan, ode manda piznit nanda maadjiinigodjin. This great eagle swooped downward, and after a length of time, the man noticed something off in the distance as they were flying along. There was something that looked like a hole to this man as he looked around, and it was the earth he saw off and in the distance, a small dot. Gego gien go bogoneane, mi manda wabandang manda janda geginwe ednakiing. Then as the great bird had swooped down far enough, he started to fly, and he flew to the place where he originally got the man. That is where the great bird flew. Mi dash ode ga nisabazit gona gamapi. Mi dash ki mibzonit dash. Oyak dash ode ga dinagot. Mi ode ga piznit. Mishko ode gi o bigidnagot. Manjnapi gona ga awanagoe. E pichnal gabane gona. The great eagle placed the man at the very spot he had taken him from. It is not known at what time of day it was when this man was returned to earth. This man was away for a long, long time, when he was up there helping the hatchlings to eat. This great bird took the man to the exact spot he had gotten him from. And again, the great eagle crouched down so the man could get off his back safely. Ginwe shode gi yashpeming, gi nadamawatne benajane nan we wisnenit. Miao de gio begin the goto de mi go minwa gadodang, what benesse. Then gach manda gi jijagashtat. So again, he takes him right to that spot where he had taken him. And when he had taken him from that different spot, put him right back to that spot. So this book, I see I've been asked to repeat the name of this story. It's called, it's by Howard Webkamigad, and it's called Ottawa Stories from the Springs. Ottawa, O-T-T-A-W-A, Ottawa Stories from the Springs. And it's published by University of Michigan Press. So the other part, the next part that I wanted to focus on is the next part of the story. Anish misagi majat maba Anishinaabe, ga binjibat gona gija, anin de gien gona gaje mamka dendamanit ode. Ne sa gona ode gona gei and dat gona, gaje mamka dendamanit god goshing minwa. Well, this man then went back home. Oh, the people of his community were awestruck or probably dumbfounded by his arrival, as he had been gone for such a long time. Mi go bejanagzit, gaige go gigoin binasin, akawawa ba wa dibaadjimak. This man, he still looked the same, and he did not have any fish with him. This man had supposedly gone ice fishing. Gidago shingode, gidabaajmat, miwe gajuebzit, gidabaajmat, kinago gidabatadam, manda gane dodagot, genewe binesiwon, anwen sigot, bekite yak shimigot, kche ajbekong. So when he arrived at his home, he told what had happened. He told the people everything that had happened to him. He told them about how the great eagle tried to kill him by smashing him into the face of this great cliff. So again, he gets placed right back where he was taken, but all the people are surprised to see him at that time, and they tell him that he was gone a very long time. But to that man in the story, he was actually just gone a few days. Again, now going back to that same article that Jim Dumont had written in '76, Jim Dumont talks about other stories where the Anishinaabe explained that one day in the spirit world is 1 year here on earth. So even though the event is concurrent and simultaneous, there is a difference in the rate of time passing between these two realms. Even though they're happening at the same time, just the rate of the passage of time is different. For the spirit, 1 day here, 1 day in the spirit world is 1 year here. So that man was gone a long time, but he just felt like he was gone for a couple of days. And this is a common theme in our Anishinaabe stories. There's a collection of by William Jones, collected in around 1910, 1912. He was half a Fox Indian, Meskwaki, and he went up to Thunder Bay, Boy Fort, and other areas, and he had collected stories told in Ojibwe, and he painstakingly wrote them down. But one of them that I really like is similar to this story, and it's a common motif, as I mentioned, is that one young boy was taken by maadjiinigodjin, the giant sturgeon. One day, this boy is sitting out by the beach, and then he goes swimming, but then he's kind of taken away by that sturgeon. Anyway, he hops on that sturgeon. That sturgeon changes him into a sturgeon, and the two of them go exploring all of Lake Superior. Meanwhile, his parents are worried sick, and they keep coming back, and they come back year after year to that same spot to wait for this boy and hoping that he comes back. And then 4 years or 10 years down the road, here that boy is sitting there on a rock on the shore, and he's the same age as he was, and his parents are, it was 10 years because his parents look old. So anyway, this is a common motif in our stories of this passage of time in the spirit world, where whoever gets taken actually seems like they've just been gone a couple of days, but as they come back, it's been a long time that they've actually been absent. So that's the other thing with dealing with our history. The other thing about that is that this is where mookodjiwong Anishinaabe, the Anishinaabe goes seeking knowledge over there. And oftentimes this is where the Anishinaabe finds knowledge or medicine when he is absconded or when he was taken by a spirit, and the spirit then blesses him or her, and gives them medicine to help the people. So they often come back from these sojourns, and they've been outfitted with some kind of medicine, some kind of teaching or ceremony. Same with this fella who was taken by the giant eagle. Misa minwa mababinese gibizigwit gimajat. Apchewene giganona gonwa jichiget. Mishko gado dangmaba Anishinaabe. Then this great eagle arose and he flew away. This man had been given careful instructions on what he was supposed to do. So that is what this man did. Nuega ge nozwanan. Ge gwawi ka nendage goan nanda nozwanan. Maanananan nozwanan wa zhinikaadek. Gi egot. This is what the eagle told the man. And those names, never ever forget these names which I am giving to you. These are the names which you will be known by. So that man that was taken by the eagle, he is given these names to carry and to give to people that need names. Mi dashwe gunda nongo Anishinaabe odawak. Mi gunda yajik yabe nakazwat newe niin nozwenan. So this is where the practice of the naming ceremony comes from, that the Ottawa still do today, the giving of the names. Kinagogi winamagon wajichikewat, pi dapnamuat, Ionei sa noswen. Kinagogi windamal get go. But must say on the way ago. Kinago nibana noswenan. All these names, and they also chant and sing for those names. He was told by the great eagle everything they are supposed to do when they are having a naming ceremony. Kaigo na ngikenzin, kcheni bana mingon noswanan. Midash kunda nishnabek nongo noswajin, newe wawin dasawat. So anyway, this is what happened to this man I'm talking about. This man was taken far away by this great eagle, way up high someplace, where there are these great cliffs. And then he ends with the formulaic saying, this is the end of the story about this man that I was talking about. So again, these stories are to actually explain as well some of our customs and practices and traditions and how they came into being and why we do what we're doing, but also that these names are actually to be perpetuated as they are part of our history as well. A second story that I want to talk about from that same book by Howard Webkamigad, Ottawa Stories from the Springs. This one is called, he called it the story of an Anishinaabe girl who is taken away. And in this story, this girl is lured away by a handsome man. And this young lady sees this handsome man and she's attracted to him and she ends up going with him. And then they end up going into the water. And she finds it strange that she's able to go into the water and then actually keep walking under the water. And then when she gets under the water and gets to his house, she finds a house there underwater, and she meets his parents. And then this young man is scolded by his parents. He said, the old man says to his son, "Why did you bring her here? Don't you know that the Anishinaabe Nidowe," he says, the Anishinaabe is a spirit, and the Anishinaabe has spiritual power. Tam Nidokeo Anishinaabe Giigonoa. This old man says to his son, they're going to do a ceremony and they're going to try and find her, and they won't stop until they find her. Please take her back. But he also, of course, why he took her, he fell in love with her. Anyway, there's a search party. Everyone's out looking for her, and the village is looking for her. And they, sure enough, they do a ceremony. Anyway, here's I'm reading from the story. Ya mabuksha nainawid ayat bekidwan gian. Oh my goodness, she's right here. That is what that person said as he approached her. Mabasa niani nawe. Here she is. At the gian go binjibaamigak wodi binesiwon. Apchigokche ndane gaza batinok nandanawajinik. There were many people who ran toward her. These were the ones who had been out searching for her. All these people were out looking for her. This was a massive search party. Misa gien gimkowin maadjiinin. And so this girl was now found. An pish binjibaamigak na sa gien. Where did you come from? She was asked by the people. Kachin nibna ching janda nibmoseme dane goyin. We have walked by here this very spot many times searching for you. Meanwhile, go gonda ginagienin maba. And then they took her home. And then the storyteller then interjects and kind of has a sidebar here. He says, the storyteller says, "Mio de ning jawiganing manda gin jejuebat ge get to go manda gijuebat gigamoding ikwewizeNs." Remember, this happened at the place called Jawiganing. This really happened a long time ago, that this girl was kidnapped and then taken someplace. Yak dash ge nambing nidokiyajik. Mi ge ga gimowditwa shkinwe nwe yawan gigan. It was the spirits who live under the water. That was who came and took the girl away for a little while. Mi sagien ode te bagamwa didawat ge gim kawawat nwe ge get sagien go na mi gien go ode gi be madwe mezit tagazawat ge yawak enim kik ode epen gishmakko be mezit tagazajik. So anyway, the people arrived at their town with the girl they finally found, and at that moment, the thunder could be heard coming from the west. So here, again, to elaborate upon or to reinforce what both Vine Deloria had said and Onabanese had written, that it's the sacred stories that you try to put together. And if you want to make a chronology, I'm not so concerned about chronology, but I'm just more concerned about pulling out more of the stories that are attached to place. And here he's transcribed this place as Jabawiganing. And I believe that this is now currently called Sheboygan, Michigan. And the late Art McGregor used to say Sheboygan is actually Jebwagan, and Jebwagan means a paddle. Oh, sorry, not a paddle, an oar. Anyway, so he situates this story at an actual place. That's the point of this story, and that also back to Jim Dumont's point that these events occur simultaneously and that they impinge upon our lives here in this physical realm that we know instead of the spirit realm. Where when the young lady went under the water and met those old people and her potential suitor, who was the Nam Bingiyat, the Bashish Bemset, they called it that one. Anyway, so here's the spirit that came to take that young lady, kidnapped that young lady, and brought her. Then eventually they brought her back up. And the reason that they mentioned here the thunders after, of course, some of you may know, but I don't know who maybe some of you don't. For Anishinaabe people, we believe the thunder is a giant bird, and he shoots lightning from his eyes, and when he cries out, that's the thunder sound. And others say it's when he flaps his wings, that's the thunder sound. But their eternal enemy are those that live under the water and live under the earth. There's these giant snakes that live under the earth and these giant other beings that live under the earth. So whenever these two are come into contact, they fight each other. And just like how a hawk or an eagle will eat a snake now, that's the same kind of idea. So here, that's why in this story, the old man, the parents of that young man who took the lady, they were scared that the thunder were going to come. And sure enough, it's the thunders that come. But they already returned that girl. And again, this spiritual encounter was situated at an actual place that has a current name now. So the other last point is here, Sheboygan, Michigan. Here, this is the same story of the young girl who was taken. This is the ending of the story. The narrator says, "Mi dash mi we Sheboyganing gin jeweb daban chijajago manjgonawepi." And this is what supposedly happened a very long time ago at the place we know as Sheboyganing. I do not know when this took place. Anishinaabe ode gid nakiwat, gibid nakiwat yan kach. The Anishinaabe have always lived in this area, and they have continued to live in this area for many generations since that happened. And this happened many generations ago. Mi manda ga ejwebzijik. Gawin dashwa waya gonanong go de Anishinaabe. Gim kamawak we. Anishinaabe we debendana ba we. Today, there are no longer any Anishinaabe people living in that area as the land was stolen from them. The Anishinaabe owned that land, but it was stolen from them and their homes were torched. Meanwhile, gi skamwawak noe wigwamowan. Yapshkiejik dash nongoje yawak. And their homes were torched, burned down to get them to move away from there. Only the white people live there now. Misa iyo ekwakwe ne dibaadjimowinan. That is the end of my story. So that's the story told there, how that is situated at a specific place, but also one that is affected by colonization. The Sheboygan, now that we call Sheboygan in Sheboygan, Michigan, probably some people, Anishinaabe people live there, but what he's talking about is that the Anishinaabe people had always lived there for many generations, but then they were dispossessed, forcibly dispossessed. So now, when we are living in places like Sudbury, Toronto, London, Ontario, Peterborough, all these places, we got to find the Anishinaabe names of those places. This old man I used to go and visit, Johnny de Bosque. This man named Johnny de Bosque, I used to go and visit, and he'd let me record him. Here's what he said, and this is also what has struck me, and it always stuck with me, this what he had said. Apene gweknaka dan we noswin maba jaganash. The white man, or the non-native, I should say, I guess, always changes the name. Apene gweknaka dan maba jaganash. The Jaganash always tries to change the name. And when he changes the name, then he actually tries to cover up history. So only when we take back these names of these places and discover them and tell the stories, then that's what informs our history. So the challenge for us now in Indigenous history all over the world, but also particularly in our case in the Anishinaabe history, is to learn these place names, the toponyms they call, and then to learn the stories that go with them, why they are called that, and then also then to find out what happened there. Sometimes these places will then have a song that goes with it. But then if we learn all this and then reconstitute that these stories and fit them in within the bigger narrative, then that's when I feel we will really accomplish or fill out more of a what we call Anishinaabe history. Anishinaabe Kenda, based on Anishinaabe Kendaswin, Anishinaabe knowledge. Meanwhile, that's Anishinaabe kinomaadwinan, Anishinaabe teaching, Anishinaabe learnings. Anyway, that's as much as I wanted to talk about, but I'll see if there's any questions because we got 15 minutes for questions. So I see somebody actually asked about birch bark and oak tree clan. In the archival record, yes, there is a birch bark clan, and they were situated, the records that I have seen, they were situated on the Georgian Bay area. And also oak tree clan, Metigamish, and those were also, there was a fella out by Rama with that clan, also out by New Credit River, Mississaugas, and then also out by what is now Alderville area and Hiawatha area. There were oak tree clans. And then they don't really call it this, but the Ottawa had a fork stick clan, Niswakwatun. And that also was, there's some debate as to whether that actually means a fork stick or fork in the river. So, but one of the things that I had learned before was that the Bemasage or Wakagija clan of Wikwemkong, that's their clan, is that fork stick. And they would say Metik and Niswakwat.
I have a question, Alan. We're still monitoring for questions. Most people, it's like lots of miigwech for the stories and the language. So really appreciate that. But I wanted to, like, for you, what is the like what's the greatest challenge in being able to reconstitute Anishinaabe history? So if there's like uppercomer students, should they kind of focus on language? Should they focus on really trying to understand that ontology that Jim Dumont talked about? Should they like what do you like what advice would you give and what have you found in the work? Because you've been doing it for decades, I would say. Like maybe you weren't calling it Anishinaabe history 20 years ago, but it sort of kind of emerged that way after. Like what do you think's been the greatest challenge, and what can, this is like three questions, what can institutions or what kind of materials need to be made available for kids to start learning like even their own history and trying to reconstitute a history?
Well, like as you know personally, for those that don't know, Deb and I know each other. We've known each other for, I don't know, 20 odd years. I've been trying to learn to speak Ojibwe for many of those years. And I'm not fully fluent yet. Some people think I am, but I'm not. But I know more than the average beginner. And I record elders and I transcribe what they say. The Anishinaabe Anwe Gakadat Kenzima Game Dimwe. I'll write down what they say in Ojibwe. And part of that is what I started out in the beginning is that principally I find that we are still relying, the written record is the privileged record in our education system. And then that privileged record actually, especially in history, we still privilege priests, fur traders, and Indian agents, what they wrote down about what had happened. And so what we have to do is we got to record our elders, record those stories, and then use them. This is, of course, a historical method is what you call triangulation, putting all these disparate sources together and coming up with a fuller story to find out different perspectives of what have actually happened instead of this monolithic, this is what had happened in Canadian history. So what I always encourage people, since I've been trying to learn the language, I always encourage people to try and learn their language, because our language actually, you could actually use it as a source of history as well. And that's why I talked at the beginning about the etymology of dibaadjimowinan, that what Basil Johnson had talked about, that it's a measured account. Our language is like Latin in that it's agglutinative, that it's made up of morphemes, and you put initial morphemes at the beginning of the word, final morphemes at the end of the word, and medials. And whenever you manipulate those, you're able to get a lot of different words. So sometimes people, the elders, when they talk to me, they'll say, "Mi we get there ajamat." That's it. He's telling an old story. Get there means just old, and ajama is part of that, just narration. And then others will say, panewa Nishnave jish zamajma. That Nishnave always exaggerates or goes too far. He's full of it, kind of thing. And then others that there's sometimes people are real humble. They say, jajago, jagajim, jagajim jajago. I've already exhausted all that I can tell. So that's the kind of thing is you end up looking at, if you're starting out and you want to learn, you actually can learn a lot about our history through our language. And then also you learn our worldview about it as well. And then when you put those two together, that's when you will get a more informed analysis and interpretation of events. Especially in that last story that I was talking about, where the young lady is taken by an underwater spirit. And then those underwater spirits are talking, and they talk about actually being afraid of being pursued by the thunders. So it's this whole other thing that's going on. One time I was at a helping out. I was helping this old man, and it was for a 4-day period. Anyway, it was we were at a sunrise, doing the sunrise, and that old man sitting there, and not many people are around yet. And so I go up to him and I ask, "Giabana go mishom." is there anything else? And then he says, "Kawab ma na wa'ankwat ode." Do you see that cloud over there? And I looked over and I says, "Oh, yeah, I see it. I see that cloud." And he says, "That cloud's been there 3 days. There must be something over there." So I never, of course, I never noticed that those 3 days prior that that same cloud was over there. But that old man, that's what he had noticed. And so if you really want to engage in this whole cultural revitalization, I think the language is a critical component of that. And then once you start with that language part, then you can branch off to a lot of different things. And I know you had Joseph Pedoniquid on here the other week, and I like all the work that he's doing. And you just look at the stories that the plants have, and that's another book that people or a speaker is that Wendy Genius. I always say genius, but Wendy Genius Macons. Uh, uh, those two books she put out, one with her mother and talking about the stories of the plants. But what I think what we have to do is look at the plants, the names of the trees, and the different names of the medicines, and then we can come up with our own taxonomy. And I shouldn't say come up with our own taxonomy. Our own taxonomy and typology is already there. It's that we haven't actually put it all together and analyzed it to actually reveal it to ourselves now. And that's the kind of stuff that we would do. So we could become, if you had the language, you could become a historian, but you could also become a botanist. And then also look at all these place names, you could become a geographer. So there's a lot of different works, but to me, the underpinning of all of these is actually Anishinaabe, the language. That we could teach geography in Anishinaabe, we could teach botany in Anishinaabe, we could teach biology in Anishinaabe, and we could teach social studies and history in Anishinaabe. To me, maybe this is just my limitation, math, chemistry, and physics. Those are harder to teach just because I don't know words for exponent, sine, cosine, tangent, perpendicular angle, isomorphic triangle, that kind of stuff. But that doesn't mean it can't be done. It's just that I want to have people pick the lowest hanging fruit, so to speak, and bolster and strengthen our base, and then move on to those. Okay, I see some questions here. Suggestion for a toponym and a story that will be a good educational tool, teaching university students about environmental interactions by maadjiinin in the GTA. Yeah, we're trying to work on that. I'm currently working, we're awaiting a grant with Jennifer Bennell, Dr. Jennifer Bennell, a colleague of mine in the history department, as well as Victoria Freeman, who is also a colleague of mine, former professor at University of Toronto as well as York University, who has been engaged in a lot of work in the GTA area as well. And then also Martha Stegman. So there's a couple of things going on that people want to work on. Oh, there's a question from Josh about the different names and meanings for our water spirits. I guess myself, I don't say those names in Ojibwe in the summer. And some of you will have heard the precept or the admonition, the prescription against actually telling our stories in the summer. And it is that basically they're awake. And then if we say their name, we're summoning them. So to me, I'm all right with saying their name in English, but because I believe they don't know English. But if you actually say their name in Ojibwe, it's just like if you were walking down the street and you saw a group of people and you heard your name, you would turn and look to see who called your name. And then if they all started laughing, then you would wonder what they're laughing at. And then you would think they're laughing at me. And you would think that they're disparaging you or mocking you. And so that's why the elders that I talk to say, don't tell these stories in the spring, and don't say their names in the spring and summer. When there's no snow, don't talk about them. And I take it to mean in our language at that time. Of course, some say the spirit understand everything, but I know some of our elders say that the spirit understands only Anishinaabe.
I think referring to the, they just wanted to know, I think if it was the late Peter O'Shea's story with the 3 clouds, I think is where some of those questions, is that a Peter story? Yeah.
Not all those are, I tried to say which ones I came from who. And Jajago Ken Mao Akiwanene. So that's I'll leave it at that. He used to say, and I always I try not to use his English name, and I think if you use his Anishinaabe name, then the people that knew him that way will know what I'm talking about. But when I use his English name, he used to always say to us, "Don't go around saying that he's your teacher, because you're trying to show off." So I actually in a public forum like this, I never say that. I try to never say that that this is who I got this from, just because he didn't say that just once. He would say that so many times, because a lot of people would go around saying that, "Oh, that's my teacher, that's my teacher," and he would tell us, "I don't even know that person," and so that's why I don't go around saying that that's who's doing that, who told me that. But these other ones like Johnny De Baskeba or Zenba Yamit, Louis De Baskeba or Gijigo Benes, the late Ronnie Walker Gijik, these guys, they never had any proscription about saying that. So anyway.
I think that's really important, that people have to realize when they're doing this kind of work to really respect, really respect who they're working with and how they want to be acknowledged as a source of knowledge. I've heard that with other elders or grandmothers and grandfathers who just said, "I don't even know who that is," and yet they talk about me like they know me. So it's just really showing respect to people who've shared. So it's 3:15 now. Most comments are like, everyone's just so grateful that you spent time with us and shared language and stories, and they were great. I have a whole bunch of notes. I'm not even going to try to bother summarizing things. I'll just say, go watch the YouTube video again, and like really thinking around knowledge and source of knowledge and where it comes from, and people being taken by spirit. That's not really talked about in my field on Indigenous knowledge systems. So this has been really super insightful. Before we close up, I just wanted to know, was there any last 60 seconds of anything that you wanted to add or say or leave people with?
Well, Apchagor Migwachan Dam Kinagi Bijayek Mampi Wasmo Sabing Gibizindoyak Kina. So I just want to thank each and every one of you for logging in on the internet and taking the time to listen today for what I'm trying to work through. It gives me actually presenting this stuff. You have to try and get it straight, and it helps myself to actually formulate how I'm gonna write about this or put it into my practice as well. So I'm grateful for the opportunity as well, and I'm glad actually people showed up or logged in, whatever. Yeah. And maybe one thing you can do, whoever puts this up on YouTube, put the titles of those books that I referred to, and hopefully drum up some sales as well, and that might help as well. these cultural organizations.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Well, yeah, I really appreciate it, Alan. Like here you are, oh, I don't know, maybe 6 hours or 7 or 8 left in Indigenous History Month, giving us a glimpse into Anishinaabe history and the work that you want to do, so we can look forward to more. So yeah, and really making it a point to learn language. And as you know, we were in the course at Webkamigad until COVID hit, and then we couldn't meet anymore. But I'm like, I think I understood some of what you were saying. So I'm really quite pleased with myself. And thank you for speaking it and using it. So I want to thank everybody again for joining in, and also any of the activities that you've been part of with the Indigenous Environmental Justice Project. And we're planning what we want to do for the rest of the summer, so stay tuned. And as well as thanking Chimigwech to Alan because I know we had to really think about this. We had conversations, and so I know a lot of thought went into this, and Chimigwech for that. It's just again thanking the students for making it happen. Anybody who knows me and IT knows I have to be managed. So that's Dali, JC, Jesse, William, Ethan, Amelia, David, and others for putting this all together and making it happen. Really appreciate the work that you've done. And with that, Alan, just Chimigwech, and good to see you. One more thing, go ahead.
Yeah. So I just said that just to tell you that just before I talked, I ended up offering that sema, just in case people were wondering about it.
Yeah, it's hard to do that, pull that off virtually sometimes. Yeah, so we have to, well, it worked. You got, it really centered you in a good way. So again, Chimigwech to everyone, Chimigwech, and really good to see you, actually. Yeah. Okay. Bye, everybody.